One machining operation that a lot of new machinists seem to develop heartburn over or lose sleep over is parting or cutoff. How to use a parting tool on the lathe for cutting grooves or cutting a part completely off. Done properly, it's pretty uneventful. You know, it'll get the job done pretty easily. Done improperly, it can cause a lot of grief. It can the parting tool can bind up in the groove and either break off or damage the part and ruin your day, basically. So what I'd like to talk about today is different types of parting tools, how to grind them, proper setup. There's a bunch of things that you can do in parting that will have an effect on it if they're not all done right. So there's a whole checklist of things you need to go through to make sure everything's set up right before you part. So I'm going to go through all that. First thing I guess I'd like to do is talk about the parting tool itself. There's a couple different kinds basically. There's if you look at them from the front, I don't know if you can see this. This is called a T-shaped, has a T-shaped profile. You can see it sort of has a short T across on the top, and then the part of the tool underneath is thinner. And I like these because there's less of the tool exposed to the side of the slot or the groove, and that's less tool to bind up in there. There's less drag on it. So I like this style better than the other popular style, which is just a tapered profile. So first thing I guess we want to do is sharpen the parting tool. I sharpen them up every time I use them, so they're razor sharp. That's the first item on the checklist. Make sure you have a sharp tool before you start. So let's go over the grinder and make sure this tool's nice and sharp. Alright, so there's nothing fancy about grinding a parting tool. Basically all you do is just grind on the end of it so it's square with the shank, just nice square cut on it, and so it has a little bit of clearance underneath. You can see it from the side. I think you can. Let's see here. Where are we at? Oh, there we go. Yeah, you can see it has sort of a taper to the front so it doesn't drag on the part underneath. Some people like to grind a little groove behind the cutting edge to act as a chip breaker, to curl a chip. I don't do that because I don't like doing that, because what it does is it weakens the cutting edge and allows it to heat up quicker, and it'll dull faster. So I don't do that. I just leave it flat on top, grind it square across the end with a little bit of just let the wheel kind of sweep underneath and kind of provide a little clearance underneath it. And that's it. That's about all there is to it. Let's go ahead and sharpen it up. Again, I don't use tool rests on the grinder. I do all my grinding freehand. So just kind of hold the parting tool square to the wheel, and just use the whole face of the wheel. Just grind back and forth. And that's about all there is to it. Should look something like that on the end. That's really out of focus. Let's see here. There we go. I don't know if you can see that or not. It's nothing fancy. Just the basics. Let's move back over to the lathe and see how it works. So now that we have a nice sharp tool, the next thing we need to consider is rigidity. That's the second thing on the list. You have to have a nice rigid setup to part successfully. And probably the first thing on the list for a rigid setup is you should borrow or steal a quick change tool post. If you're using a lantern type tool post, good luck. They're not known for their rigidity, and your chances of successfully using a parting tool are greatly reduced using a lantern type or a rocker type tool holder. So the best you can do is get a quick change tool post. They're pretty cheap. You can buy an imported one for not a lot of money, and they're a lot more rigid than the lantern type tool post. Okay, another thing you need to do is you need to make sure that try and limit the amount of tool overhang out of your tool holder as much as possible. Don't stick any more of the tool out of the holder than you absolutely need to. So if you have to cut to the center of a 1.25 inch piece like this and stick it out about maybe 1.5 inches at the most, or well, about 3/4 inch at the most, just enough to reach the center of the part. Let's see what else. Well, let's mount up here. Mount the tool bit in the holder. Next thing we need to do, probably the most critical thing about parting is alignment, lining your tool up properly. If your tool isn't perfectly perpendicular with the work, as it feeds in, it's going to bind up on one side more than the other, and that'll cause the tool to actually take a curved cut through the part. And what that does is it greatly increases the amount of drag on the side of the tool, and eventually the tool will freeze up in the groove and it will break off, or it will break your part off. So you have to make sure, that's probably the most critical thing of parting, is to make sure that your tool bit is exactly perpendicular to the work. One way to do it, the way I usually do it, is mount your tool on the post, loosen up the post so it pivots like this, then just run the carriage or the tool against the end of the part until it's exactly perpendicular. You can look down between the side of the tool and the part at the gap and line it up pretty close that way. If you're not sure yourself and don't think you can do that, don't be afraid to throw an indicator against the side of the tool and just run your tool back and forth against an indicator. They'll tell you if it's exactly aligned properly or not. So, there's a couple ways to do it. You can run it up against the chuck. Use that as a, if you can't get to the end of your part very easily, touch the tool to the face of the chuck to line it up. But get it square. If it's not square, you're going to get in trouble probably when you try it apart. Alright, next thing on the list, we have to line our tool up vertically. Okay, the top surface of the parting tool needs to be exactly on center of the part, not above it, not below it, right on center. If it's below it, as you get in close to the center, the part will suck the tool bit in and it'll grab. If it's above it, as you get close to the center, the stock will start pushing on the end of the tool underneath the cutting edge, and you won't be able to part it all the way off. So the top face of the tool has to be exactly on center of the part. So let's do that. You can this part's been turned already, so it has a little mark on the end of it. If it hasn't been turned, then you can use use a center in your tailstock or something like that, but make sure it's on center vertically. Alright, so we're lined up now, we're on center, we have a sharp tool. Let me change camera angles so you can see what's going on a little better, and we'll part this thing off. Okay, here's a view from the end. You should be able to see what's going on here a little better. I have a little too much overhang here. It's hanging out farther than it needs to, so I'm going to loosen my parting tool up, run the holder in right close up to the part, slide the tool back out so the tip of it's on center, and tighten it back down. The absolute minimum overhang you can get. Okay, now that changed my alignment a little bit as well, so let's tweak that a little bit, square it up to the end of the part. All this stuff has to be done right, or any one of these things can ruin your parting operation. Alright, so now we're all lined up. We have a nice sharp tool. We have all our tool overhang to a minimum. Next thing we need to do is set up the RPM. I like to use about half the RPM I would turn at. So, something like this, I guess it's about 250 RPM or so. About like that. Maybe a little slower. Alright, next thing we need to talk about is oil. Parting requires a lot of oil. I like to use nice heavy thread cutting oil. This is a sulfur-based tapping oil that I could use for cutting threads. I use it on steel and I use it on aluminum as well because it's sticky and it sticks to the work. And you have to provide continuous lubrication when you're parting. So I just let it drip on, or if you have flood coolant, that works well too. Just put that on it, but the tool has to be lubricated all the way through the cut, or it'll freeze up. So let's go ahead and do that. And just kind of dribble it on at a steady rate as you feed in. You can use power feed if you want, or feed it by hand. Should cut off nice and clean. The chips should come out of the groove pretty easily. Everything's set up properly and the tool's nice and sharp. Shouldn't have any issues at all. There we go. That's about all there is to it. Follow the list of the action items that I've covered, and you shouldn't have any trouble parting. I'll see you next time.